Easier time last time just holding it. So thank you for welcoming me. My name is Patrick Kinney. I spent 26 years in prison. I was incarcerated at the age of 16. I grew up in a small town called Vassars in the Saginaw area, and I was a pretty good kid. I had a good family. I had good grades when I was in elementary school. I ended up moving to Flint and lived with my dad there. My parents divorced when I was about 2 years old. I had a younger brother, and I started getting in trouble. I started hanging out with the bad crowd, especially in Flint, and I went to Flint Central High School, it's now just a ruin. It's covered in graffiti, but even back then, this was the early '90s. It wasn't the best place, and to make a long story short, the story is in that book that I wrote when I was in segregation about almost 20 years ago now. I think I finished it in 2007. To make a long story short, me and a friend of mine tried to steal a car, and we ended up committing murder. I feel horrible about it now, and for most of my life I have. Soon afterwards, I realized, the pain and suffering I caused to not only him, the person we killed, and his family, but my family and just a lot of people. It's devastating what something like that does to a lot of people. And even I'm in criminal defense now because I taught myself the law when I was in there, and we do criminal defense appeals. And I can tell you that the families of the people who commit crimes and are convicted of committing crimes are just as much victims as the family of the victims, because they didn't do anything wrong and their family member committed a crime, and their family member loses their life, basically, a lot of times, because prison sentences are so long in the state of Michigan that a lot of prison sentences are essentially life. And they end up paying for it emotionally, financially, if they're trying to hire an attorney to get them out of prison and to get them a new trial, to get them some type of justice. So, in fact, I felt so bad soon after it happened, and I was on the run, and I was 16 years old, so I didn't know how to live. I was fending for myself. I was eating out of dumpsters, and I realized I didn't want to do this for the rest of my life, so I turned myself in. I thought if I threw myself on the mercy of the court, told the truth, did the right thing, that I would get some type of mercy. I knew I had to serve a lot of time in prison, obviously, but I thought I would get out one day, and obviously I'm out now, so it seems like a inevitability, but believe me, it was not. The judge at the time, this was 1995, so this was the time you've probably learned about how in that time period there was a lot of scare tactics politically, and they started locking up juveniles for life, and that's just starting to change now. So I was sentenced to life, and it was a parolable life sentence. But in Michigan, up until relatively recently, the parole board, their policy was life means life. Even if you're doing a parolable life sentence, you're doing life, you're not getting out. And less than 2% of parolable lifers in Michigan were ever paroled. I didn't realize this at first. When I first went to prison, there were a lot of lifers in there who had been in there for 25, 30, 40 years. And they started telling me, you better get used to this, because you talk to them about getting out and doing your appeals, and they're like, yeah, you better get used to this because you're not getting out. And that was a tough pill to swallow, and it took me a long time for it to sink in that I was never getting out of prison. And that's how I lived most of my life, is thinking I was going to be in prison all my life. So this is a dream come true. Like, being out here, just the most basic things that we do out here, sleeping on a soft bed, eating a good meal. Every meal out here is good. Every meal, like my worst meal out here is my best meal. So I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to be out here. In a lot of ways, I don't believe I deserve to be out here. You know, I realize the gravity of what I did, and that's partly. So I'll get to that. But so at first I felt aggrieved because I turned myself in, and I was still sentenced to life, and I was still going to be in prison for the rest of my life. So I tried to fix that at first by studying the law. And I'm grateful for that because it gave me a great career now. I learned a lot about the law. I spent all my time in the law library, and I started writing briefs for when doing my own appeal. Other prisoners saw me doing it, and they would talk to me, and they realized I knew something about it, and they started hiring me to do their appeals because most people in prison don't have any money. Their families don't have any money, so they give me $100 or so, which in there is a little bit of money. You know, your prison wage is about $30 a month, if that, 30 to 60, maybe 15 if you got a bad job in prison. And so I started doing that, and kind of supported myself doing that for about 20 years. And I have a job now as a paralegal. I write briefs. I basically write the appeal briefs for a law firm, and it's in Bingham Farms near Southfield. I have some business cards. I've made some YouTube videos. You can look at them on that by scanning the QR code on that business card about criminal law and criminal appeals, if you're interested. So I appealed my case for about 8 years, and all my appeals were denied. And then I realized, you know, I'm not gonna spend the rest of my life in prison. I'm gonna do something about it. I'm gonna be proactive. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to escape. I managed to get a bunch of books in about how to, you know, these Air Force search and rescue survival manuals, edible guides to edible plants, all this kind of stuff that you see in the movies. And I learned it. And I studied the prison system and the security system, and for a long time, I finally found a weakness. And that's another long story that maybe I'll write one day. That book ends at my sentencing. But I didn't make it. I managed to cut through one fence. There's multiple fences. I managed to cut through one, and it was kind of a matter of timing. My timing was off, and I was kind of so worked up that I made a mistake cutting the fence, so that slowed me down, and they managed to catch me before I got out. But the result of that was I went to segregation and solitary confinement. We call it solitary confinement out here, but it's really not, because you're on a wing with 20 other guys, and they've got nothing better to do than talk to each other, but you can't really hear each other because you have to yell out of the back of the door. So they're yelling and screaming out of the back of the door all day, and that all day, and you can't leave. It's 24/7, and they get into arguments, and you know, sometimes they start throwing shit at each other or at the COs. So that's kind of what it's like. And that was pretty tough. Like I went from, in general population, you get to go to yard, you get to go run around the track, you get to play softball, you get to play, different sports. You get to go to the weight pit, you get to just sit around, walk around, play basketball. In segregation, you're in there basically 24/7, and you get to come out for your yard time. Right after breakfast, they have these cages, these chain link fence cages outside the unit. It looks like just like a dog kennel. So a row of chain link fence cages that are smaller than your cell. And after breakfast, they, one by one, they'll cuff you, take you out of your cell, put you in the, if you want to, you don't have to go, put you in the yard cage, we call it a yard cage, and lock you in there, take your cuffs off, and that's your yard for an hour. And then, so I didn't go to that much because I did most of my segregation time in the Upper Peninsula. They have a lot of level 5 prisons up there that have a lot of segregation cells. So that's where they send people for long-term segregation. And plus, when you went to yard, they took that as an opportunity to shake down your cell. They would, a lot of times they would tear it up, and then you'd have to come back. All your stuff would be all over the floor, your sheets, your books, your toothpaste and toothbrush and all that stuff. Plus, you weren't allowed to have any food in your cell, so they fed you 3 times a day. Bring a tray to your cell. They have a slot in the door. They put it through the slot, and you had to either eat it in the half an hour they gave it to you, or leave it on the tray and put it back out. And dinner was at about 4:30 usually. So around 9, 10 o'clock at night, you get a little hungry. And so what most people did, what I did, is I would keep some stuff off my tray. But then the next day, when if you didn't eat it, when they come to take you to yard and shake your cell down, they find it in there. That's a violation. And when you have a violation involving food, they put you on food loaf, or neutral loaf they call it, which is they take the whole meal, they blend it up, cook it in a loaf, wrap it in cellophane, and that's what they give you when it's chow time for about 4 or 5 days. But if you ever talk to anybody who's eaten food loaf before, they'll tell you that the breakfast loaf isn't that bad, and they usually, because it's usually oatmeal and peanut butter or something and jelly, and so you eat that and then don't eat the rest of them for the rest of the day. But so I didn't go to yard much. Showers are about the same, except that would be at 2 o'clock when second shift comes on. So you got about 8 minutes. They take you to a cage, basically, enclosed shower, 1-man shower, and you got 8 minutes to shower and towel off and be ready to go. So that's a little kind of snapshot of what segregation is like. And if you want to ask questions about it, I'm happy to answer because I'm not there anymore. So the way they decide, they don't give you a sentence, a term that you're going to be in segregation. They give you detention, which is your punishment, but the detention's only, I think the limit on it now is 15 days. They can't give you more than 15 days detention. So what segregation is, long-term segregation, it's not technically for punishment. It's called administrative segregation. The purpose of it is to control the prison, keep things under control, keep people from fighting, keep people from escaping. So that's administrative segregation, and that's for 30 days, and it's reviewed every 30 days. It's pretty much a farce, and I realized that pretty soon. And you would go to a security classification committee, they called it. Once a month, they would take you down to the case manager's office, and you would talk to the case manager, deputy warden, maybe sometimes the warden, and they'd go over why you were in segregation and decide, and then they'd tell you, well, just keep staying ticket free, don't get any trouble, we'll look at you next month. And that went on for years. And in fact, when I went to Baraga, which is the furthest prison up north you can get, it's about at least a 10-hour drive from here. It's almost to Wisconsin. The deputy warden there, she told me that she was never going to approve me to get out of segregation, and because her friends were at the prison I tried to escape, and she said that they didn't like that. So I wrote that book. Before I wrote that, I had to come to terms with where I was in my life and what I'd done. I was pretty much at the lowest point you can imagine. In my crime that I committed, I was basically trying to run away from my problems. And I realized that I did the same thing when I tried to escape. I didn't face my problems, which was my life sentence, and I tried to run away from it. And I ran away to a point where I was somewhere I couldn't run away from anymore. And the only escape was either to face it or to commit suicide. And I thought about that a lot. There were guys in there who did it when I was there. But I think what stopped me is one of the main things was thinking about my family. I realized I'd hurt my mom very bad by doing what I did, and even my escape attempt, because I'd done some positive things too. I learned law. I started a college correspondence course. Back then there was no, they had taken away the Pell Grants from prisoners in the United States in the early 90s. So there was, and the colleges weren't offering any, they weren't getting paid for it. So they weren't offering any courses in there anymore. So if you wanted one, you had to pay for it. You had to do it through correspondence courses, through paper correspondence courses, because there's no internet access in there. There's no computers. And that was hard to do because that was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when these schools were starting to go to computer-based instead of paper-based. But I found a business school to go to, and I started a master's degree in business. And in the middle of it is when I tried to escape. So I felt, my mom was proud of me for that, my family, and I let them down again. And I couldn't let her down again I knew that would be devastating to her if I killed myself. So that's one of the main things that stopped me from doing it. But I realized that, so if I didn't do that, I had to, the only thing to do was to face it. The only thing to do was to face it and do my best to, we say make the best of a bad situation, but that's really what it was. So I started writing the book. People had told me for a long time, you should write a book about your experiences even before I went to segregation. And so I started writing that book. I spent a lot of time doing that, writing it by hand, writing several drafts of it. I had already started writing poetry and stories. I met some guys in there who were doing that, who were sending them to magazines and stuff, and I got involved with the Michigan Prisoner Creative Arts Project here at University of Michigan. They're doing their annual exhibition. In fact, this, I think it's from March 24th to April 1st or something. I can't remember exactly the dates, but they're doing an exhibition of prisoner creative art, a lot of visual art, written works, and my poems are in like the first, I think, volume 2 through 10 of their annual review of Michigan prisoner creative writing. And so I wrote that book, and I finished my college degree, and after about 6 years, they finally let me out of segregation. I went to general population. This was at Arbor, which is also in the UP. It's by the Pictured Rocks National Monument. And I was still in a high security prison, so they have several levels of security even when you're outside of segregation. And I had to stay in the highest level outside of segregation for a long time. And it was hard to get down to a lower level. Most lifers and people doing long term are at level 2, which is the main low security level. Level 1 is people who are about to come home. They're like within 4 years of their earliest release date. And so I wanted to get back down to level 2 because level 4, you're in your cell. You're still in your cell. It's actually kind of worse than segregation in some ways because you're double bunked and locked in your cell for all but maybe depending on where you're at, 2 or 3 yards, and you get to go out to library and stuff like that, and so it's a little more open. But anyway, I managed to get down to level 2 after about 3 or 4 years, and this was when they were just starting to do dog training in prison, in Michigan prisons, and they started a program at Alger where prisoners would train dogs. So they trained these shelter dogs so they wouldn't be euthanized, and they would be adopted. They would be able to be adopted, and I managed to get in that program, and that was great. That was really amazing. This was about 2014. So this was after I had 18 years in at this point. And so there's another long story that goes with that. I went back to segregation because I was involved in the Michigan Creative Arts Project, and I decided to start painting. I was just doing writing at that time, and I did some watercolor paintings, and I'm feeling great because here I am training this dog. I was 16 years old when I went into prison. I hadn't touched a dog since then. I hadn't touched a cat. Hadn't touched a person except on a visit, because you get to hug your family member once at the beginning of the visit, once at the end. Other than that, I haven't had any physical touch, any normal things we do out here with loved ones and significant others. So being able to pet a dog and having this amazing relationship with these dogs, and it was very fulfilling and felt incredible. And so I had started to kind of come to terms with, I still had hope. I still had hope I would get out. I wanted to continue to have good behavior so there's some possibility I could get out one day. And being in a dog program was part of that originally, but then I found real fulfillment in it. But I started to come to terms with where I was and at peace with myself and my situation, and I began to see metaphorically the beauty in a bad situation. And one morning I like to run and work out, and one morning I would run with these dogs, and I was running as the sun was rising, and it was just a beautiful scene. And I had seen paintings like that prisoners had done for the Michigan Creative Arts Project, and so I did a watercolor painting of a sunrise as seen through the fence. Well, this was in early 2014, I believe, 2015, and this guy had just escaped from Ionia Correctional Facility during Super Bowl Sunday, because he knew the police, the officers, the COs, the corrections officers we called them police. We called them police in there. That was our slang. So sometimes I call them that. We knew the police were watching Super Bowl just like everybody else. So he planned it all out, and he actually escaped. He got away. He was caught a few weeks later, I think. But right after that, right in the middle of that, is when I did this painting, and I was out on the dog. They had to make a long story short, so they thought I was doing something suspicious, because we had a special yard for the dogs, that only the dogs, we took the dogs out to walk. And I went out there, and they came and searched my cell, and they found this painting. I had it in an envelope. I had the U of M form filled out, ready to give it, because they come up to the prisons and they look at the art, and they said don't mail it to them. And they found this, and they knew my history, and they said, well, this is a drawing of a prison fence. This is a drawing of a prison fence by somebody who tried to escape before. This is escape paraphernalia. This is dangerous contraband. And they sent me back to segregation for that. That was pretty devastating. That was probably the worst point I was ever at, because here I was thinking I had turned everything around. I was having a little bit of hope. I was in a great place, training these dogs. And I even made a painting about it that got me sent to segregation. So that was tough, but I just kept going, and I had, my family support, and I had lawyers. At this point, I was working with a lawyer because in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that juveniles, people under 18 who commit crimes, can't be sentenced to mandatory life in prison without parole. So I started making an argument at that point in the courts. I started filing appeals saying that my life sentence was basically the same thing and I should be resentenced. And I started working with this attorney. One of my clients in there sent her a brief I did, and she said, well, this is really good. She said, I can charge you a reduced fee and just use this brief. So I wrote her and I asked her if she'd do the same for me, and she started doing that. And her encouragement helped me to keep going too. And I ended up only doing about 6 months that time because I had a lot of help and support, and people were writing, and they helped me with the appeal process of the misconduct. I ended up getting a rehearing on the misconduct because we sent paintings that other prisoners had done and that were displayed by the University of Michigan, and they gave me a rehearing. They found me guilty a second time because they said there's no intent element, there's no mens rea element, there's no it's a strict liability offense. So if you have dangerous contraband, you're guilty even if you didn't intend to do anything with it. And they said it was dangerous contraband because it depicted offense, but the hearing officer wrote in the hearing report that I wasn't trying to escape, so I used that to get out of segregation. I still had to do another year in level 5, but I managed to get down to level 2, and I continued appealing my case, and on this juvenile life without parole argument. All my appeals on that were denied, but the Michigan Supreme Court just last summer agreed with that same argument I was making in another prisoner's case. And so I was actually resentenced just a month ago, even though I've been out for 2 years. I've been out for 2 years now. So I got resentenced to a term of years, which actually got me off parole 2 years early because lifers have to do a 4-year parole. But around 2000, the parole board finally, they started paroling parolable lifers who committed their crimes as juveniles. They started giving them a real consideration. And by this time, I had done a lot of positive things. I had taken all the courses you could take in there. I got all the certificates you could get. I had a business degree, and I was still doing legal work, and they granted me parole, and I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. I can't believe I've been out here 2 years now. It's pretty incredible, and I get to speak at things like this and talk to you guys and hopefully give you something that's beneficial. And right now I'm working at a law firm. I'm still doing criminal defense appeals, and I just bought a nail salon. So my dad's wife, my dad's a friend of the family. Basically, she owned a nail salon for a long time, and she lost it through no fault of her own. And they convinced me to go into business with her, and it's up in it's in Heartland. If you go right up 23, if you get off in Heartland, it's right there between the Kroger and the Target. It's called Designer Nails and Spa. I got some coupons if you guys want them. So we've just been in business for a month now, and it's really cool. We're doing all these renovations. We're putting in new pedicure chairs and all this stuff, but I don't want to turn this into an advertisement. So I guess that's my story. And if you want to open up to questions, or I don't know how you want to do it.
Yeah, so any questions for Patrick about any of the things that he's talked about?
Did you have any trouble, because we've talked a lot about people having trouble once they get out of prison, trouble getting jobs. Did you have any trouble getting hired at this law firm?
No, I didn't. I'm kind of an exception. I had a lot of family support, and I actually started working for this lawyer in 2018, so about 2.5 years before I got out. I just wrote him and I said, hey, I can write these briefs don't you look at them, and if you want, I'll write them for you, and you can pay me a lot less than you'd pay somebody out here. And he did. And so I was writing briefs for him, and so he just hired me as soon as I got out. So yeah, but I know there are people who have a lot of problems with that. I was worried I was going to have to do like just a real menial job, at McDonald's or something like that. I didn't know. I'm very grateful I didn't have to do that, but I know there are a lot of people who have to do the 9 to 5 and have to do jobs like that, and it's probably not too hard now because there's a lot of it's a good climate for people who are looking for jobs, but I know that is a big thing for a lot of people. Anybody else?
So I know you said when the second time you went into segregation, that was like a real low for you.
Mhm.
But do you feel that you were like more emotionally ready because you had like started to recover to deal with it the second time?
I think so. I'd been there before. But I think in ways that made it worse because I knew how bad it was, and I knew, like, here I was only tried to escape once, but now they think I tried to escape twice. So I did 6 years the first time. How long am I going to do now? And I'm never getting out. Now I might have been able to, I had a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but now it's like it's over, and I'm probably going to do. There were guys in segregation who did 10 or 15 years, 20 years. It's easy to stay in there for a long time because they have a lot of segregation cells. And if they keep the prison open, like Baraga, for example, they have 5 or 6 housing units, so 5 or 6 buildings that house about 200 prisoners each, 200 cells, and if they keep that prison open, they have a kitchen, so it's like a business. They have their overhead costs. And if they have their overhead costs, they got to keep the cells filled, because if they don't, they got to put those prisoners somewhere else. They got to keep another prison open. So, if you're interested in reforming segregation and stopping segregation, or at least the use of long-term segregation, the overuse of it, closing down these prisons that have all these segregation cells is a big first step. Or at least, something, getting rid of the segregation cells. That's one of the big problems. But yeah, it was. In some ways, it prepared me for it and made it easier. In some ways, it made it harder because I knew what it was. Anybody else?
There's one.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Do you think your time in prison and meeting other prisoners has made you overall more sympathetic to people in those prisons? And regardless, have you ever met or believed that there are some people like, you deserve your life, something or anything along those lines? Do you believe that?
Oh. Well, I'll tell you, it's made me more sympathetic to people generally. I've noticed that I took classes. There's actually a fellow prisoner who started this class called Compassion and Accountability class, and I took that class, and it helps you think about things from other people's perspective. And I've noticed that a lot of people who haven't gone through that type of experience that I have, or gone through that type of class or something, a lot of people out here don't have a lot of sometimes don't have as much understanding, or don't have as much empathy toward other people. I always, one of my friends, I would always, we'd get in a situation where he'd be talking about somebody, and I would say, I'd try to look at it from that, well, like with my work. So my coworker, she sometimes will say, our clients, they're in prison, they're doing life, and they're doing long terms of years, and they get frustrated. And sometimes they get frustrated with us because we're kind of a last resort attorney, last appeal, and they've been through all these attorneys who they feel they've screwed them over. So sometimes they're not very nice to us, and I try to explain to her, you got to put yourself in their shoes and understand where they're coming from. And it's hard. It's hard to do that for a lot of people. In some ways, yeah. So yes, I do have a lot of empathy for them. I know where they've been. I know what they're going through. And on the other hand, there are some guys that I wouldn't want to live next to me. You know, I don't know about life without parole. I think there's some old guys in there who've been in there for, 40, 50 years, and they're not a threat anymore. But then there's a problem, because then what do you do with them? Their families are gone. They don't have any skills. They don't have any ability to make a living, really. They're used to laying on their bunk and watching TV all day, basically. That's what most people do in there. I'm kind of an exception. I just couldn't do that. I just had all this restless energy. I wanted to do something all the time. But a lot of people in there, that's what they do. They sit on their bunk and watch TV, or they go hang out on the yard, play cards. So when you get through a long sentence like that, or even a short one, most people aren't any better. They don't have the time or the inclination, maybe is a way to put it, for soul searching. Some people do go through a lot of soul searching in there, but it really depends on the individual. So yeah, I have a lot more sympathy.
Being in the DC right now, do you ever still wish that you escaped?
No, I don't. I'm glad it happened the way it did. It was tough. And if I had known I would get out, it probably wouldn't have been as beneficial as it was. For me, the whole experience. I look at it in a positive way. Except for the crime I committed, obviously, I feel horrible about that. But I look at, having gone through it, I'm glad I went through it. Do I want to do it again? No. But it made me a better person. It made me a strong person. It made me a empathetic person. It made me a patient person. So yeah, it takes a lot of work. It's not something that's just going to happen to you because you go to prison. You have to have motivation. You have to have family support. You have to have people who care about you and want you to, give you a reason to continue and to keep going, and to work hard and to try to better yourself. There's a lot of guys in there who don't really have anybody, so it's tough for them. But yeah, it takes work. Like I'm, even today, I have to remind myself a lot of times. I have to, it's thinking positive and looking at the positive aspect of life. People could say, a lot of people tell me, they're like, we're sorry you lost all those years, and you were in there too long, and you lost all your 20s and all your 30s, and you lost all that time. And I don't like to look at it like that, because I think, number one, I really do believe I deserve to be in there for all that time, maybe more, for what I did. My victim's never gonna get a second chance. His family is never gonna get a second chance. And I like to look at it in a positive way. You can't change it. You can't change it now. That's one of the things that I really learned in there, is because you really wish I didn't do this. I wish I could change it. And you can't change the past. You have to just make the best of it. And you have to keep reminding yourself that. You have to always remind yourself that look for the positive. Look for the positive in the situation. And there always is a positive. There always is a positive, no matter how bleak the situation seems.
So from being in prison for so long and seeing so many different people, would you say that the prison reform system actually does reform people who are there, or is make them kind of worse off?
Not most people, no. Some people it does. It depends on the individual a lot. I would say on average it does not. reform anybody, because for a lot of reasons, there's not a lot of things to learn as far as job skills. They don't really teach. There are barely any programs in there. Barely anything to do except watch TV and hang out. And there are a few little classes, but they're kind of a joke, most of them. They don't really, and they're not going to be worth anything unless you're self-motivated either, unless you want to have some insight into yourself. And I don't know how you make somebody want to have insight and want to better themselves. I guess that's what you guys are studying. Hopefully there are some answers. I don't know, but yeah. No, I don't think it reforms most people, unfortunately. But a lot of people, and I don't know if that's the right way to look at it either, because any one of us could go commit a crime, where people do things, a lot of people who commit major crimes that get you life or long terms a year, like armed robbery and murder and carjacking, stuff like that. Most of the time, that's a one-off situation in their life. There are no career carjackers, or if there are, there's very few. There are no career murderers. There's a few serial killers, but those are very, very, very rare. People commit crimes like that in a one-off situation, and yeah, they must have had something wrong with them if they were willing to commit a crime like that, but it's not something that's cured by sentencing them to 20 or 30 years. That's not the prescription that's going to solve the problem, and it doesn't. So I guess that's the answer.
What was the most overwhelming part about coming out of prison?
Just everything. Everything is different. Everything is new. It's totally different. There's so many every experience was new. And I couldn't sleep. I didn't really sleep for about 2 or 3 months, because you lay down to sleep, your mind starts processing all the stuff you experienced during the day. And luckily, like I said, I had a lot of support and everything, but it was just everything was overwhelming. Things are different, I was in there 26 years, and the stores are different. The road, the buildings are different. Just everything's different, and there are a lot of things as a 16-year-old I had never done. I'd never paid for dinner. I'd never. It's been so long since I pumped gas. I had to be retaught how to pump gas, and the gas pumps are different. So it's just everything was new, and it helped having people there to help me through it and walk me through it, and that was kind of essential. Yeah.
For people who have been in prison for a long time, before you get out, are you informed of any significant law changes that could affect you or you're not aware of? No. You're informed that you cannot possess a firearm, ever. You're informed that of the rules, of the parole rules, your parole supervision rules. Other than that, no, it's up to you to learn the law, just like it is as a citizen. If ignorance of the law is no excuse, if you commit a criminal offense, it doesn't matter that you were never taught it, you're guilty. So no, they don't do that. They are a lot better at preparing people for release now than they were before. In the last 10 years or so, they've gotten better. They kind of hook you up with resources if you don't have anybody. They have some organizations that provide some assistance, but yeah, they don't inform you of the laws. No. Anybody else?
We're just about out of time.
Oh.
Let's all give a big round of applause for Patrick.
Thank you.
And I'll keep his business cards up at the front. We're passing around the books. are you okay if we keep the second vote?
Yeah,
as well?
yeah, absolutely. I signed it to you guys, so
Great, yeah, so.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we'll take a 10-minute break.